Okay, so let's get going here. The topic for today is the problem of building a community for interactive storytelling. And we have discussed some issues of this previously. One, and there was a general agreement that we don't want to try to build on top of an existing community because those exist, the gamers and the interactive fiction people and the academics. Each of these has a culture which is in some way uh, inappropriate for interactive storytelling. They have certain biases and attitudes. Gamers are definitely the wrong people for this. We know that because gamers simply have no interest in genuine storytelling or drama. The interactive fiction people are close, but they are so wedded to certain ideas about how to design their work that it is, I think, unlikely that we will get much out of them. Although I will note that many of the interactive fiction people claim that that that's no longer the case, that my perceptions of interactive fiction are based on 20th century interactive fiction, and modern interactive fiction is much more open-minded, much broader in range, and definitely makes really serious attempts to integrate drama and character interaction into their work. Before we proceed, I'd like to inquire among this group, do you guys have any comments on this? Do you think these people are right that interactive fiction has indeed evolved to the point where it really can bring in serious drama, say on the level of what Lemort d'Arthur has?
Yeah, I think they're right to a degree. I think a lot more interactive fiction in the 21st century has those concerns compared to the 20th century.
Yeah, well, the 20th century stuff is basically just puzzles. And we have
Mostly.
seen some artistic material um, in the in the last decade or two. It's just that the art seems to me to be more expository than interactive. The art comes from good writing or something like that, but I haven't seen it coming from the interaction. Now, of course, I just skim the surface of that field, and so can anybody suggest an interactive fiction work that I should look at?
Did you ever see Galatea? That was
Yes,
Emily
I did.
Schmidt's.
And that's a perfect example of what I'm describing. Uh, I Galatea is indeed a work of art, but I consider it to be a work of expository art. Um, that is, the artistic content is not in the interaction, it's in the content, in the text. Um, I don't know, disagree? Anybody? It's this matter of opinion, very subjective.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like it sort of is in the same vein as like a Storytron because it is tracking the emotional state and of the other character. I guess it's doing a lot more processing under the hood than a typical interactive fiction, especially back in those days, 23 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. Any other suggestions? Okay. Well, it's sort of disappointing.
Mine is more that I haven't kept up with the field more than anything. So that's why I'm crickets over here.
Well, part of the problem is the field has exploded as the tools like in Form 7 have become easier to use. I mean, the text, the textual approach to programming has widened the accessibility of interactive fiction to a very large audience, which is great. But it also means we get a hell of a lot of crap coming out. And it's really hard digging through that crap. So I don't know what to say about that. But nevertheless, we face our own problem of finding people to join our movement. And I think the real task here, a number of people have zeroed in on the key point that we need to help the people who are actually working on it here and now, rather than go out looking for people. I think the task is to make the task easier for those who are already working on it. At the same time, there is a need for expansion. Let's talk about these two steps. One, how do we best help people like Johannes who are working on a story world right now, and Ajmal, and Craig, are you still working on that project?
So I've got a couple of projects that are just kind of floating around. I think I've managed to figure out the nut in order to make that one thing work, but I consider my tool more of an outlier than an actual thing, because it's not graphical. It's very much based on my own idiosyncrasies and whatnot, and I'm not sure it would ever catch fire.
Well, I think as far as tools go, can we all agree that it would be a very good idea to have a range of tools?
I'm up for it.
I mean, we are still in a very early stage, and I mean, I've made tools, but there's no way of knowing how accessible those tools are to other people. In particular, mine tend to have a heavy mathematical component. And in fact, I must admit, Storytron was, way beyond out into the wild blue yonder. I'm very proud of it as a technical achievement, but it's simply, and perhaps in 50 years, the ideas in it can be reapplied to a more, I don't know, more sophisticated audience. But for the moment, we need better tools. I would say I would apply one specification to such tools. I really don't think we want to be using the tool you download and then use, because it's almost impossible to get a universal tool that can be downloaded and run on Windows or Linux or Mac. There's just too much variation here. And so I don't think I think we have to do something that runs directly on the web, and that means JavaScript. Although it's possible, I mean, we could do an internal, Python, something like that. But that means we are taking on a responsibility, a load issue that could run away from us. So
Yeah. Well, I posted that Narrat engine, Narrat.
yeah.
And they're doing a lot of things that I think would be very useful for us. The way that they've got the tool set up, it's all web-based. It looks like it maybe downloads a little bit of a payload or something like that. I'm not entirely sure if it goes to the browser or whatnot. I didn't look in that deeply into it, but it feels like it's I almost hesitate to ask the author, hey, could you put in some sliders and whatnot for global variables and that, and we could basically just run with that. Because I think it would, a lot of what is in there is very close to what we could probably use for something like a I'm not sure. It just I played around with it for a hot minute, and it's like, it was that lovely area of so
I have not had the time to look at it yet. I do have some time this afternoon, and I hope to look at it then.
the other thing is that the stuff that they're doing on there for drawing a community in there, I thought was very fascinating, because they have a section in there for posting, hey, you want to upload your game, here we go, and so that you can use their resources for distributing your game, or at least poking someone at it. I think it's basically a link to like an itch.io type thing, where you then on itch, you then run the game on that platform. But at the very least, it has a showcase of here's all the stuff that's out there, and here's how you can get running with it. So I think that would be very useful.
Okay, I will definitely look into it. See if,
okay, thank you.
I mean, I am perfectly happy to throw away all of my work if their stuff, if they're ahead of us, even if their feature list isn't as good as we'd like.
I think it's a different set altogether. I mean, they're doing things, like skill checks for an RPG, which is like, that, I mean, it's along those lines, but I think it's not too far off. It's like, I think you could probably do something like, instead of a skill check, like, hey, it's a global variable check, or hey, it's a calculation that happens, and then the result pops out, sort of thing.
Yeah, I could, after I make a good assessment, and I will probably want to consult with you on that, I may send them an email and say, hey, you want to make this a dual use tool? Do it, you built it for RPGs, but with some minor changes or additions, it could be useful for interactive storytelling.
Well, it's also MIT licensed as well, so yeah. So okay. It's already open source. So that was something that popped in my mind. It's like, So more to come on that.
Okay, I will definitely look at that. Any other ideas or suggestions on how we can make it easier for the people who are here, or on the Discord server, or might join us later?
I think the main thing that I see a lot of folks asking is, am I doing it right? And I don't necessarily think that that's something that we need to, say, oh, you're doing it properly, yay, verily. But on the same token, at least a few guidelines about what exactly makes this, what exactly would an interactive story be compared to interactive fiction of some form? What are the distinctions? What are the things that you can leverage off of each other? I think that would be pretty helpful for folks.
Okay, I could certainly write up something. Some of the factors that I see that differentiate IS from IS. One of them is the difference between a bushy tree and what I call a palm tree. That is, a bushy tree, it just spreads out. You got, 1,000 different possible endings. And boy, you can, go through once on this path and another time on that path, and then this path, and there are all these different paths available to you. I think that's sort of the ideal in interactive fiction. Whereas Le Morte d'Arthur fundamentally was, instead of being like a bush, it was more like a palm tree, straight line and then branching right at the end. There were branching things inside, but at a deep structural dramatic level, it was much more like a palm tree. And so perhaps that's one way of explaining it. Or perhaps the way to describe this is to say that theoretically, you could make an excellent interactive story world that is purely linear with just one set of branches at the very end. And during the linear, the choices you make are only changing global variables. That's an extreme, but it's, I think, one way of thinking about it. The other is the emphasis on drama and character interaction, which, I don't know, my impression is that IF still puts a lot of emphasis on world exploration. You know, here you are in a strange new world and you explore it in order to figure something out. But yeah, let me write that down. So it would be a good idea for me to write up an essay. What's the difference?
I feel like that may be true of parser-based IF, but these days it seems like more and more is, I guess, choice-based. I guess like choice of games, and in those types of stories, similar to Le Morte d'Arthur, it's much more about story and drama rather than exploring a setting.
Oh, you're seeing there's a strong trend in that direction?
Yeah, it seems to be strongly based on whether it's parser-based, like Inform, versus choice-based.
Mm.
And a lot more being written these days is choice-based, I think.
Okay. Well, that's good, because that does the parser-based relies on a standard set of verbs that are required to be applicable in all situations. And a generalized set of verbs like that is just not going to be able to address dramatic subtleties. Whereas the choice-based approach does allow you to give, very fine distinctions. In Le Morte d'Arthur, I had a number of places where you had 2 or 3 options and they were all similar, but each one had a slightly different sense to it.
That may be something to highlight as well, because the one thing that I noticed with Nerat, and the example that they had was that it was a very strict, would you like to do this or would you not like to do this? As opposed to in Le Morte d'Arthur, which is like the gradations of how you were going to do that particular thing. Whether it was, there didn't seem like there was a lot of rejection of the choices that were there. It seemed more like it was, how strongly do you want to do this? How do you want to approach this?
Okay.
As opposed to, would you like to listen to music? Yes or no?
Yeah. Oops. Boolean thinking. Let's see. Johannes, you've been working on you put a lot of effort into your story world, and you're using oh, come on, what's his name's
Sweepweave.
Sweepweave, yeah.
Sweepweave. How well is that working out for you?
Yeah, it's working fine. I've been working on it for like 2 years.
Oh.
I've been trying to refine it. And it's kind of like this romantic.
It's certainly big. I mean,
Yeah,
I've gotten partway through it. Unfortunately, my browser reset and I had to start over from the beginning. So that kind of slowed me down. But I don't know. I mean, are there shortcomings? Are there things that you would like to do with sweep weave that you really can't quite do, or that are too clumsy or difficult?
Yeah, I can't. I don't have any kind of way to be put in photos. I just have text in the web in the browser. I don't have any capability to put in pictures or photos of characters in Sweepweave. It doesn't allow me to put in any photos in.
Yeah.
I'm using version 0.015, and I don't know if it's totally functional. I don't know how far in because now there is version 0.39, so I'm using an earlier version of Sweepweave, and I don't know if it's kind of functional. Is very, very good.
In programming terms, it is not difficult to add imagery. There is one difficulty, though, that I can understand. The imagery cannot be part of cannot be easily available on the web unless you have your own website. He doesn't want to have his website holding all those images. And so there is a problem there. Nevertheless, I'll point out one of the big lessons I learned with Le Morte d'Arthur is that there's a beautiful synergy between the encounter editor approach and Midjourney, because I could have a standard photograph. I had a photograph of a person who represented the character of Guinevere. And then I could, in Midjourney, say, show me this person looking frightened. And then later, show me this person looking upset, show her looking happy, and so forth. And I could generate a great many images that all had different, dramatic significance, but they were all the same character. And it's real easy to use Midjourney. So I think that opens up possibilities, because we really do want to see. I think facial imagery is crucial in storytelling. Without it, it's very difficult. In fact, the best way to learn this is to watch silent movies where they don't have any dialogue, or dialogue is very rare, and so an awful lot that goes on is done through facial imagery. And I think Charlie Chaplin was definitely the master of this. He could really, he was very good at that. So we can definitely learn a lot there. We really need those facial images, and Midjourney makes that possible. But I don't know. Any other thoughts on how we can make life easier for people currently attempting to build story worlds? Okay. The next question involves recruiting people. And it has been pointed out many times that the most important thing we need to recruit people is an example that inspires them. Fortunately, we have that example in Le Morte d'Arthur. Unfortunately, Le Morte d'Arthur is big, and in fact, I suspect that a really good story world is necessarily big. I would compare it to the difference between a short story and a novel. That is, a short story, I would say most I don't know, Chris, I'd like your reaction to this. I put forward the claim that I don't fully believe in, that IF is more in the style of short stories than novels. What do you think of that claim?
Maybe. I mean, like a lot of the choice of games are longer, but yeah, I mean, some of this might be because of, for a long time, the parser-based world was kind of revolved around IAP-comp, and that emphasized games that could be completed in 2 hours,
Yeah.
which was kind of a reaction against the Infocom style, where games would take like days or weeks for you to play through and puzzle through all of the solutions to the puzzles.
But the time requirements for the Infocom games were mostly, your time was consumed in endless
Yeah.
random experiments. I mean, what if I, hit it with the axe? What if I set fire to it? What if I drop it off a cliff?
What if I spent $10 on Invisiclues and did away with most of that?
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, like bad at lateral thinking puzzles and puzzle solving in games generally, so I'm not a good judge of that anyway.
Okay.
What about, have you thought about using both traditional mediums, like the book? We could make like a story in a book, and then have a link to a story world, so we could maybe introduce interactive storytelling kind of gradually to people that have never heard about it.
Yeah,
We could do that, like maybe we create a soap opera, like a romantic story.
Aaron Reed did something like that in a Kickstarter. It was a book that had a interactive fiction related to it, I guess, and you would like scan in codes from the book as you unlock, which would unlock things in the interactive fiction. I guess that was a Kickstarter he released it like a decade ago or so. I think it was called Icebound or something like that.
How well was that received?
I don't know. I'm not sure how many people bought it besides the Kickstarter backers. But let me
Okay.
I think the main thing is getting folks to do the time investment. I mean, for me, whipping out a short story is not too tough. And generally it's taking an idea and then seeing it through to completion. I know other authors that, are novelists in that, and it feels like it's, they basically said, say, in the next 3 to 6 months, I'm going to push out a book, whether I like it or not, sort of things. So I'm wondering if, and then you add the interactivity piece of that and thinking about all that piece, and then it's like, okay, you've got all this other stuff you have to consider. So yes, I think the better examples will be longer form interactive story worlds, but I think getting folks interested, you may want to have a few short stories from different authors, because it's like going to a library. It's like, okay, and I'm not saying this in a bad way. I'm saying, go to the library and there's the book, and you check out the book, and then it's like, okay, did you like the book? Yes or no? Well, come back to the library again and you can read the book again, as opposed to having a variety of different things for folks to read.
Yeah, like as far as traditional publishing goes, like short stories generally don't sell these days unless it's from like a really established author like Stephen King. But other than that, pretty much the only short stories that sell are in big anthologies with a lot of different authors.
Well, that raises a question then. Is it possible to make good interactive storytelling that is short? Is length necessary? Do we have to force the player to go through many interactions in order to get the depth of drama that?
I mean, I tried it with that decluttering story world, and we played it through one time. So I think it's possible, but it has to be, I think you have to ratchet up the stakes a bit in order to make it so that it's satisfying. I mean, you have, for LMD, you have a lot of choices that culminate into pretty high stakes at the very end.
Yeah.
In my story world, it was basically your stakes were whether you managed to declutter within 30 minutes or not. And then it basically gave you a grade. So the stakes were low and the payoff was a little bit low. So I think you'd have to really ratchet up the stakes on that in order to have a more satisfying type of an ending.
Yeah, I think that longer stories, I guess, allow more depth. I guess they kind of make it easier, and that the alternative, if you're going to make a story world and make it short, is to encourage the player to go through it a few different times so that they get different endings. I guess just like you want a really quick playthrough cycle, like 10 minutes maybe, so that they can make all very different choices and see how differently outcomes turn out.
I have my doubts that a short story approach can be effective here. Here's an analogy, a way of thinking about it. If you look at literature, we have short stories and novels. Craig has pointed out that the short stories don't sell that well. But there's another way of viewing length, and that is to look at age appropriate thing. That is, literature for very young people is very short. Then there's young adult literature, which is longer, but adult reading tends to be much longer. And so there's an ontogeny here, where it appears that the real depth or whatever comes from the length, that you need the length to achieve the kind of depth you would like to have. I don't want to come down too hard on this point. I'm uncertain about it, but I think there's some truth in there.
Well, I think it needs to be audience appropriate. You mentioned, if you're trying to get a young child and interested in interactive storytelling, giving them War and Peace, the interactive story world is probably not going to do it for them.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, I've seen a lot of this in the wild, and I'm not sure how much of it's true broader scope or how much of it's just true in my circles. A lot of people are just reading young adult stuff because it's a quick hit. They don't have the time to sit down and dedicate to longer form stuff. Or some people do, I don't know. But I think the more time strapped you are, the more you're going to look for something that's shorter in length. And so my thought is, why not both? Why not have the longer form stories? Why not have the shorter form stories and let folks choose what exactly? I mean, basically, you could even have a rating, and say, this is, like games will have, it's got 40 hours of content or some other thing like that. And then you find out that it's basically 20 hours of you plodding along trying to find the 40 hours of content.
Yeah.
But at the very least, you could say, okay, here's the number of encounters, here's the number of choices that are in here. If you want to do something, that stark, but say, okay, this is how long we think you're going to be able to. It's going to take you to play this. Or
we could possibly use. Here's another comparison that is illuminating. Let's think in terms of video. Video for kids is cartoons, short, extreme. That is, we don't get any kind of emotional subtlety in there, and they resolve quickly, but they pull the kids in. And then we have TV shows, which typically half an hour or maybe even an hour. And then typical movies run 90 minutes to 2 hours.
more like 3 hours nowadays.
Well, the more serious ones. For example, a few years back, I watched Silence, a very artistic God, I can't remember the director, but this very serious art and so forth. 3 hours long. And so generally the very long movies are ones that demand a greater investment from the audience. And in fact, much of what they're doing is much more subtle. Subtlety takes time. Perhaps that's the way to think of it, that if you're not at all subtle, you can do it very quickly. It's a cartoon. Bash him over the head with a huge mallet. Whereas the deeper stuff takes more time. So I'm going to say there's a direct correlation between the dramatic subtlety and the amount of time that the story requires of the player, of the audience. That I think I'm pretty confident of.
I'm going to slightly premise reject, slightly.
Okay.
So I am an adult watcher of cartoons. We watch things like Archer, Rick and Morty, a whole bunch of other things like that. The subtlety doesn't necessarily, you can still be subtle in an adult form like that. Mostly it's sight gags or some other thing like that.
That's true.
Yeah, and even with Bugs Bunny in that, I mean, if you're really paying attention, and if you were keyed into 1950s culture the way that the animators were, there's a whole bunch of things in there that are absolutely stunning and somewhat wrong.
Well, I'm reminded there's been a series of modern cartoons starting around 25 years ago with the LucasArts people, and they make these cartoons that are ostensibly for kids, but every now and then one of the characters will say something that only an adult will recognize and is hilarious for adults. There are a lot of those. The Up, Brave, not so much Cars.
Yeah,
but
you're talking about the Pixar ones.
yeah.
Yeah. Even Rocky and Bullwinkle. There are two ways to watch Rocky and Bullwinkle. At least for me, it was funny moose and squirrel, and then later on it's like, holy crap, this thing is so loaded with puns, it's ridiculous.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's also kind of neglecting like other countries, especially like Japan, where there's a whole huge population of adults that read graphic novels and watch anime on TV and movies, and those typically have very adult themes. I mean, there's some that are made for children, of course, but I'd say the majority are not.
I will never forgive one series that was Cardcaptor Sakura, where it was definitely an adult-ish type theme of, it was basically the mom came back or something like that, and I was bawling my eyes out. I'm like, knock this stuff off, for God's sakes. It was like really heavy stuff. So yeah, I mean, there are definitely, it's not necessarily the art form that dictates whether it's good for kids or whatnot. It's the actual story on whether it's good for kids or adults or young adults or whomever.
Yeah. Let me point out there is also in video we have an epic form, which is a series of television shows. A good example being Game of Thrones, where at the end of that, after you put that huge investment into it, there's a hell of a lot of stuff there. It really goes on. In fact, we have started to see that. The first example I can think of actually is Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which broke the rules of Star Trek in that it was a continuous story, whereas the Star Trek was just, oh, here we are at another random planet, and oh, look, these people are different this way. How are we going to cope with that? Another way of saying it was that the most Star Trek series, the shows were interchangeable. You could flip around the order. There was no order. Whereas Deep Space Nine really broke the rules by having a developing story and that went on for years. At the end of which there was real dramatic impact. When you reach that final those final episodes, there really was a sense of all the pieces coming together. And we've seen a number of other shows doing this. To a small extent, there was Lucifer, TV series that had a developing storyline, although it was nowhere near as strong as Deep Space Nine. I don't watch that much TV, but I'm sure each of you can suggest television series that develop a larger story, and that gives them a lot more power.
Babylon 5 is the one that comes to mind. I mentioned that to you before. It's highly
I've
recommended.
never seen it, but it also develops a long story.
So, funnily enough, J. Michael Straczynski pitched Babylon 5 to Paramount, and then suddenly Star Trek Deep Space Nine came out. And so it was, which one ripped off the other one? And it's like, it could be an alternate universe where there were both shows being in development at the same time.
And I think he was originally like a producer or a writer for The Next Generation.
I think he was, yeah. I mean, he's definitely a working man's writer. He definitely is. His autobiography is stunning to read. It's called Becoming Superman. If you ever want to read something which is very, very strange, he comes from an extremely strange background. Spoiler alert: there's Nazis involved. But regardless, it has a lot of through line and a lot of how he talks about developing the show for television. Each character basically had its own story arc and had a trap door in case the actor or actress was no longer available to play it. So it wasn't these, it basically took the idea of something like MASH, where you've got multiple people and they've got their own stories going in that, but certain actors are no longer available or whatnot, and saying, okay, well, we've got this troupe show. At least we have satisfying storylines when the person says, I'm no longer want to work on this. I've got another opportunity to do so. Some very good, satisfying endings, and has some very interesting ideas of how to stage something like that, where you do have satisfying endings for characters that you're no longer interested in keeping around. But regardless, it also had the problem of a planned out 5-series story arc or 5-season story arc, and then was going to be canceled. Like most American television, was going to be canceled in the 5th before the 4th season was out. And so they basically took all this wonderful story that they had created, managed to get it all the way through, and then they're like, oh, that was so fantastic, let's have a 5th season. And it's like, okay, I don't think we've ever made it to the 5th season.
Dear. Well, okay, so there's an interesting debatable issue here about whether we can produce dramatically powerful stuff in short story worlds. I don't know. It's a debate.
With my story world, I wanted to attract more people, like more maybe women, to do the interactive storytelling, so we could have a broader kind of dimension, kind of like have a kind of better view. Maybe I wanted to create this dramatic story world that I'm creating now, but I don't know if it's really possible to create drama that's strong.
Well, I don't know, if you put the characters through many different experiences, I think you give them much greater depth. Certainly that's the case with Le Mort d'Arthur. The player goes through a huge range of different issues, dramatic conflicts.
Yeah, I wanted like to have more women come to this to interactive storytelling. That's why I wanted to create this story world. It was supposed to be for women that want to experience a romantic story world.
Yes, yes.
So we might maybe get more people to come to our medium, to interactive storytelling, because I think our kind of view is too. It's not very many dimensional. If we can get more women into it, we get their kind of viewpoint. I
It's
think
even more experiences overall, because not everyone is experiencing the same thing that we are. So writing from our own experiences, it's kind of one thing though that I would point out is if you want dramatic stuff with your characters, find the flaw that they have in them, and there's usually more than a few flaws, and really test it. Even in comedy, you have something like British comedy, and I think Stephen Fry said it best, and I'm going to really botch the way that he says it because unfortunately he's got an incredibly eloquent way of saying things and I am not nearly as eloquent, where you have your character who is from the UK, and they were promised kingdom, and they can't have it, and they can never have it, and so they will try always to have that thing that they want. And it really works over in the UK because of course you have a lot of people who are very class focused and stuff. You've got something like Keeping Up Appearances, where you have Hyacinth Bouquet, who is going to stop at nothing to try and ascend the social ladder, and her family is going to consistently embarrass her to the point where she is never going to be able to achieve that. So you take that flaw and you just kind of twist it a little bit and really turn the screws on that. So for dramatic characters in that, you have the thing that they want, and then you ensure that they're not going to be able to have it until there's that final apotheosis or whatever you want to call it, where they can manage to get that particular thing. And that's where the drama, that's where the comedy comes through, and all of this stuff is making sure that your characters are tested throughout all of this stuff. So if you got a character, it's it's like I can't have X, or if I do, I would like to have X, and it's like, here is why you cannot have X, and it's going to be consistently why you cannot have X.
But how do we create a community for interactive storytelling? How do we kind of get this up that we wanted to create? So we would get more people to join.
I have a suggestion, an idea that I've been toying with for a while, and that is really, in order to get more people, we got to do marketing, advertising. That costs money. And one way to do it is I could go on my Patreon, and I've tried to chase everyone away, but I'm still getting about $35 every month from people who just won't go away, or maybe they've died and they're just still, I don't know. Anyway, but I could ramp that up again and say, look, a new project, we're going to try to recruit a wider range of people for interactive storytelling. But before we can do that, we've got to have all of our ducks in a row. So we've got to have at least one really good, easy tool to use. I think we need, pardon?
I was saying, yeah, I think the tool is the most important thing.
Yes,
Something
I agree.
that's easy to download and install and get started.
Yeah. And second, Le Mort d'Arthur is not quite enough because it takes some hours just to see it. So maybe we need some other good story worlds. So what I'm saying here is, yes, let's launch a recruitment project, but before we do that, let's define what has to happen before we launch.
There's one small thing that I would say, and that's look at this cool thing that I'm doing over here. Part of it is just word of mouth. It's putting yourself out there, putting your stuff out there and saying, this is something that I'm creating and this is something that I'm working on. And when people say, oh, what exactly are you using for this? That's, I think, a much more organic, takes a lot longer to do, unfortunately.
Yes.
But at the very least, it's more humane or human, whichever you want to say. It's that idea of, I'm enjoying myself doing this particular thing, and here's how you can too. I think that's really how you break the dichotomy of, we need the cool tool and we need to have the community to be able to use the cool tool in order to create the content that is going to attract people to use the cool tool. And it's like, yeah, I think that's the way to do this.
Color
Yeah,
television.
like any marketer will tell you that word of mouth is the best form of advertising. Like, it gives you the best people who are interested in whatever it is that you're selling, you're giving away, and produces the best community.
Well, I can certainly put stuff on my website, and I can put stuff on YouTube, and that can certainly help. I don't know, Facebook, for example, but I don't know how, I don't have that many people following me. I don't know how successful that would be. And the reason I think in terms of advertising dollars is something like, Facebook dollars. We post something. You don't think that's any good?
I think Facebook, unfortunately, you don't have the capital in order to make it so that people are going to actually see anything on Facebook. And I don't mean necessarily that you're not wealthy. I mean that it's going to take an awful lot of money in order to get it in front of eyeballs on something like Facebook. And I think you're going to run into the same issue that I ran into with Meetup, where you're going to get folks that are going to be seeing something that is like, what the hell is this? You know?
Yeah.
I think that's
What about being somewhere in the long tail? With like we can create a niche market, or just a few people that are interested in this kind of story worlds that want to join our community because they're interested into the artistic story worlds, but not something mass media, but more something that is more narrow, to the point that we just need to attract people that are interested in this thing.
I wonder if there would be anything worthwhile in exploring Facebook groups and or Discord groups. I mean, there are a lot of social media does have a lot of specialization areas. It might be possible to plant some seeds there.
I can try and ping my the groups that I have, because I'm in the RPG communities on Dice Camp on Mastodon. So that may be one approach, is to just throw it out there and say, hey, here's this really cool thing that I'm looking at, and by the way, you can too.
Okay, well,
could it be possible to kind of like make story worlds like more shareable? Like with YouTube, you can like make videos like shareable over the net, but I'm not sure if it's too optimistic to create something like that. Something that makes you able to share story worlds to maybe other pages or something.
I don't think that would work with Le Mort d'Arthur because Mort d'Arthur is so long. That's one of our problems here, that interactive storytelling doesn't come across quickly. There are all sorts of great examples of, action games where, somebody can throw up a 10-minute YouTube video showing all the tricks and so forth, but
yeah, it would be like a let's read on YouTube.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if anyone would actually pay attention to that unless you're really interested in the person that's reading it.
Hmm. Well, okay, we've run out of time here, so it is clear that what our next step is. We've got to expand the range of tools and possibly get another few story worlds to show off with. So I will look at the that site you suggested, Craig,
Awesome.
and let's see where it takes us. And any research anybody can do on how to expand our community would be of great value. Okay, well, I will see you guys next month.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.